Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I want to chat with you all about the new Netflix adaptation of Persuasion. So I watched the new adaptation of Persuasion on Friday night. That happened. So going into this movie, I had already adjusted my expectations based on the trailer. I had resigned myself to the fact that Anne Elliott's character was going to be altered, that she was going to be more reminiscent of Austen's more outspoken and bold heroines like Emma or Lizzie Bennet. I understood that there would be historical inaccuracies in clothing and hairstyles. I was prepared for a few cringeworthy lines here and there, and despite all of that, I still wanted to watch it. I thought it could still be a good movie, and it could still capture some of the important elements of Persuasion. If not Persuasion exactly, then the essence and spirit of Austen as a whole. After all, the director is a self-proclaimed Janeite. After the social media controversy surrounding the trailer, the director of the film, Carrie Cracknell, spoke out about her love of Austen and her approach to the film. My friend Heather from Fresh Parchment sent me a wonderful article about this, which I'll link in the description box below for you to peruse for yourself. But basically, the director urges that the trailer isn't the entirety of the film, and that we should still watch the movie to understand her approach. Well, I watched the movie, and I still had issues with her vision for the adaptation. I thought her approach was haphazard and not well executed, and I regret to inform you that even my very tempered expectations of this film were not met. But before I infuse too much negativity into this video, let's talk about the few very positive features about this movie. First of all, the cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. In the vein of the 2020 version of Emma, it's aesthetically stunning. There are beautiful shots of Kellynch's gardens, gorgeous footage of the seaside at Lyme. There's a pair of particularly silky horses trotting along in the sun with the wind whipping through their manes that were very memorable. And the characters are all framed perfectly in every shot. The film crew and cinematographer were top-notch and gave me everything that I want visually out of a period drama. Another not negative element of the film was its diversity in casting. I feel like since Bridgerton, there's been a refreshing shift in period dramas to include a more diverse cast. Bridgerton, of course, was not the first period drama to introduce characters of color, but it seems to have been the piece that set the mainstream expectation for the inclusion of multiracial, indigenous characters, and people of color in period dramas. And this Netflix Persuasion follows suit. One aspect that I have mixed feelings about in this film is Lady Russell's character. I actually appreciated the closeness that was shown between Lady Russell and Anne in the movie. I find that their closeness is something we're told of in the book, but that never really registers for me. While reading, I'm of course cognizant that Anne respects Lady Russell and holds her opinions in high regard, and I'm aware that Lady Russell cares for Anne deeply and wants what's best for her, but I don't feel the closeness of their relationship in the text. So I think that highlighting that aspect in an adaptation is smart. However, I wasn't thrilled with the way it was executed here. I do see Lady Russell as a parental figure more than a girlfriend, so discussing her sex life with Anne doesn't seem in keeping with character. Neither does the fact that Lady Russell is suddenly sympathetic to love within marriage and feels that persuading Anne away from Wentworth all those years ago was a mistake. I do think it could have been interesting to focus on Lady Russell's realization of Anne's inner turmoil, though, and, to have her pay special attention to Anne in an adaptation. In the book, no one really understands what Anne is going through. She's virtually invisible, suffering alone while others are oblivious to her plight. No one but the reader is privy to her internal feelings and struggles. And when they do consider Anne, it's for their own purposes, whether to bolster the status of the family or to help them deal with their own issues and conveniences. While Lady Russell does care about Anne, her own opinions on class and status and her visions of what she thinks would make Anne happy cloud her advice. Transforming Lady Russell into a character who realizes Anne's feelings 8 years later could be a very interesting twist for an adaptation. but it wasn't explored thoroughly. And Lady Russell isn't the only one in this film who shows special attention and consideration to Anne. Louisa is also more aware of Anne's feelings in this adaptation, and that makes Lady Russell's attention seem less purposeful and less impactful. As far as the other supporting characters, I thought that Sir Walter Elliot, Mary, and Elizabeth were all over the top, but I can't say that I really minded. They're all characters in the book that lend themselves to this type of an interpretation. I felt myself wishing that Admiral and Mrs. Croft were more prominently featured simply because they're one of my favorite couples, and I love their interaction with Anne in the book. I didn't really care for the portrayal of Louisa. I thought that she wasn't quite bubbly and naive enough in comparison with Anne, though that might have to do more with Anne's characterization, which I will definitely get to later on. But there also isn't enough emphasis of Captain Wentworth's desire for firmness and determination of character in a wife. In the novel, Louisa sort of serves as a contrast to Anne in that she seems determined and firm in her character towards Wentworth. And in the novel, Louisa does not let Wentworth talk her out of her dangerous and famed jump off the stairs in Lyme. In fact, right before her jump, she says, "I am determined I will," echoing back to their previous conversation of the qualities that he desires in a wife. But the jump scene in the movie just seems silly and stupid because there's no depth of comparison to be made between Louisa and Anne's character there. It seems like they wanted to keep that scene from the book, but at the same time didn't want to do it justice and didn't want to really delve into Louisa and Anne's characters. Another aspect of the movie that I have mixed feelings about is the breaking of the fourth wall, where Anne speaks directly to the viewer. I feel like it could have worked, but really didn't for me in this case. One of the main issues with adapting Persuasion to screen is being able to convey Anne's complex interior mind to the viewer. Austen, through her free indirect discourse, has the ability to narrate in third person, but to also provide the reader with Anne's point of view. As readers, we're privy to Anne's perspective, her internal thoughts and opinions in a really unique and unobtrusive way that's always been difficult to translate to film. The director explains how she tries to overcome this obstacle by breaking the fourth wall. She says, "The thing I love about breaking the fourth wall is it allows the audience in a way to be cast as her friend or confidant. I think it allows this access to complexity of her inner thoughts. It's a way for us to understand Anne's interiority." So much of the book is about Anne observing her family and their bizarre behaviors and her frustration at that. And so to be able to just look at the audience and sort of connect over that frustration felt really compelling as a device. On the one hand, I think that this is actually a lovely approach to handling Anne's character, and the common dilemma of translating free indirect discourse to film. On the other hand, the way it was executed didn't work for me. Because the movie changed Anne's character to be so much less reserved, the need for a device like this no longer seemed relevant. And the types of things that Anne confides to the reader in this film sound like they're coming out of Emma's mouth. They're the type of biting, judgmental assessments that Austen's Anne would never even allow herself to think, let alone divulge to anyone else. It's a shame because I think that this breaking of the fourth wall approach could have actually worked really well with a quiet and reserved Anne who didn't look directly at the camera too much, but still addressed the viewer. The way that it was actually executed didn't work for me and didn't make me feel closer to Anne as a character. And in fact, it raises one of the main issues I had with this film, which is, who is Anne as a character? The truth of the matter is that I don't understand Anne's character in this film. Is she supposed to be a new version of Anne, more along the lines of Lizzie Bennet and Emma, outspoken and bold with witty comebacks and a sarcastic sense of humor? Is she supposed to be Bridget Jones, well-meaning but very insecure and clumsy, awkward and embarrassing at times? Is she supposed to be reminiscent of the Anne in the book, kind and reserved, sensitive and attentive to others, often at the expense of her own needs and desires? I think that the issue is that the movie tried to make her a strange combination of the qualities I just listed, and therefore there are inherent contradictions in her character. You can't be confident and sure of yourself, outspoken, like Lizzie Bennet and Emma, while at the same time being insecure and clumsy and awkward, like Bridget Jones. And then if you're trying to be true to the book, the Anne there is completely different than both of those types of characters. But regardless of what was intended for Anne, the chief quality that disturbed me about Anne's portrayal was her drinking habits. Let's forget for a second that the Anne Elliot of the book would never deem it acceptable to be drunk in public. The validation of alcohol as a coping mechanism on screen is problematic, and it was never addressed in the film as such. Towards the end of the movie, Wentworth tells Anne that he admires her for her quiet dignity and ability to endure. And I actually laughed out loud at that point, because the Anne I had seen on screen was no such thing, but evidently she was supposed to be somehow. When I see Anne shouting at Frederick through a window and then pouring wine all over herself, or inappropriately announcing at the dinner table that Charles Musgrove had once wanted to marry her, that certainly cannot be called quiet dignity or endurance. Anne's characterization in this film didn't work. And it's not just because she isn't Austen's Anne. It's because I don't know who she's supposed to be. She simply isn't a fully realized character. If you're going to make the choice to alter one of Austen's beloved heroines, you have to do so in a way that creates a new and compelling character and that sheds light on some aspect of the novel. This was not that. This example of Wentworth telling Anne that he admires her for her quiet dignity and ability to endure also exemplifies another issue I had with the film, which is that the script often told us things with dialogue rather than showing them to us with its acting. If the movie had shown us Anne's quiet dignity and ability to endure, this line would have made complete sense. There's another line where Anne says of Wentworth, "He treated me in cold politeness and civility." Again, that's how he's supposed to treat her in the book, but not what the viewer witnesses of the interactions between them in the movie. There's a beautiful scene in this movie where Anne is settling the affairs of Kellynch Hall before the Crofts arrive, and we see her lingering in the foyer, looking around contemplatively. There's also a scene where Captain Wentworth gazes at Anne after she interacts with Captain Bennet. Honestly, it's not even that powerful a gaze, but you can tell that the actor is trying to convey some sort of emotion at least. This movie would have benefited from more scenes like those, which actually give the actors the opportunity to showcase their talents and demonstrate so much more about the conflict and characters of the story than a bit of cringeworthy dialogue ever could. And speaking of, let's talk about that cringeworthy dialogue in this movie, because I have been putting that off. Some popular cringeworthy lines from this movie that you might have already heard circulating around include, "If you're a 5 in London, you're a 10 in Bath." Or, "We're worse than strangers, we're exes." And then later, "Now we're worse than exes, we're friends." I assure you that there's more. I'm not even going to begin to regale you with my thoughts on the heinous octopus line. Out of nowhere, she just spouts, "Sometimes I have this dream that a giant octopus is sucking my face, and as I struggle to get free, I realize that my hands are tentacles, and I can't push it off, and then I realize, of course, that I am the octopus, and I am sucking my own face." Seriously, what is this dialogue? The movie is honestly peppered with cringeworthy lines galore that don't do anything for Austen fans. I'll spare you more of them for now, but what are these lines attempting to do, and who are they written for? Most people I've talked to say that apparently these lines are attempts at humor, and also are supposed to be modernizations of Austen. First of all, the idea of infusing humor into Persuasion is a joke in and of itself. Persuasion is the most serious and subdued of Austen's novels. Perhaps there's a bit of room for humor if you're trying to go for that in Sir Walter Elliot and Elizabeth's characters, in the portrayals of the Dalrymples, or in Mary's hypochondriac nature. But introducing humor into the main characters' story arcs makes no sense, and actually demeans their love story. I personally think that some of these lines are attempts at accentuating Anne Elliot's awkwardness, but that awkwardness somehow gets misinterpreted as social ineptness in this film. There's an awkwardness to Anne's character in the book, but it's really only when she's around Captain Wentworth, and it's not something that anyone notices, besides the reader. Other characters certainly aren't privy to it, with the exception of Wentworth himself. Anne's awkward nature would never include blurting seemingly random things at inappropriate intervals, stumbling, squeaking her chair at the dinner table, or stumbling over her words, though perhaps that's less a function of awkwardness and more a function of drunkenness. And yet all of this is exactly what happens in the film. It's frankly weird and isolates us as viewers rather than endearing us to Anne's character. Now, for the idea of modernization. Sure, these lines are not Regency language, but I don't find the lines in question to be particularly modern either. They're awkward and unnatural and frankly outdated by today's standards. Perhaps they might belong in a bad rom-com from the early 2000s, but even that's a stretch. When it comes to the dialogue in this movie, Claudia from Spinster's Library said it best. These lines are what an 80-year-old man thinks a 27-year-old woman sounds like in the 21st century. I really can't say it better than she did, and apparently one of the screenwriters was an 80-year-old man, so yeah, that checks out. The movie struggles in that it's not of the 21st century, nor is it of Regency Britain. It kind of exists outside of time and space, and that doesn't work for an Austen adaptation. Austen is all about authentic characters navigating love despite the societal conventions of the time. Changing the time, and thereby the social conventions, doesn't matter. Look at the success of Clueless and what it did for Emma. Clueless takes believable, well-rounded characters and thrusts them into the society of Beverly Hills High School. It's not Regency Britain, but it's a well-organized society with its own hierarchy, code of conduct, and language. And it lets us examine Austen's original work in a really interesting and nuanced way. Or take a look at the new Hulu movie, Fire Island, which is Pride and Prejudice if the Bennet sisters were 5 gay men on their annual beach vacation to Fire Island. Again, this is a movie with believable, realistic characters who navigate the gay community with self-imposed class systems, which are magnified on this island. These adaptations are so successful because they acknowledge the essence and spirit of Austen's work, while firmly rooting themselves in a specific society and time period. The new Persuasion ultimately doesn't work because it takes Austen out of time and also lacks authenticity of character. The conventions in the film are neither entirely Regency nor a decent approximation of modern societal norms. That, plus the cringy dialogue, almost makes whatever societal space they're living in entirely unrecognizable. And of course, the characters are anything but authentic. Anne is full of contradictions in personality that make her unrecognizable as a human being. And Wentworth is so flat and boring that I forget he's even in the film. One of the foremost joys of Austen's work is being able to envision her characters as real people, so real that you can imagine someone like them in your modern society. My biggest issues with the movie weren't even the fundamental misunderstandings and misinterpretations of the source material. Though, as an Austen fan, that of course deeply upset me and is something I could go on and on and on about. There are so many differences in this movie when compared with the book. But I also thought that this movie didn't work well as a movie in general. The dialogue was cringeworthy in any era, and the leads appeared to have no chemistry and romantic tension between them whatsoever. Watching it was a painful experience. So much so that about 30 minutes in, I actually paused and made a much-needed digital purchase of the 1995 Persuasion adaptation to use as a palate cleanser for this utter disaster. So those were my thoughts on the movie. I'm not against modernizing Austen, but this wasn't quite that, and I don't really know what direction this was trying to take, but it didn't work for me. I'm curious to know what your thoughts on the movie are. Have you seen the Netflix version of Persuasion? What did you think of it? Did you agree with me, disagree with me? What do you actually look for in a period drama, or what do you like to see in a book to film adaptation? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down below. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you in another video very soon. Bye!